Hi, welcome to On the Fly, the show that takes you to local fly fishing destinations. I'm your host, Lee Smith. While many people associate fly fishing with trout, the truth of it is, during the summer months, fishing for bass and brim with poppers with a fly rod can be equally as effective. Today we'll be fishing from kayaks here on Lake Kenoshia in Danbury, Connecticut. Our special guest is Frank DeGrazio. Frank is a licensed New York State guide and also guides out of the Angler's Den. He regularly fishes many of the local waters. Frank is going to show us some tips on how to be successful in warm water fly fishing, including what equipment to use, what species are typically found in a lake like this, and how to cast and retrieve from a canoe or kayak. Frank, thanks for coming to On the Fly today. I really appreciate it. What can you tell us about warm water fly fishing?
Well, right now it's a great option in the summertime when the trout streams are starting to warm up. So it's a great option to get into some bass, pickerel, panfish, use a kayak, rowboat, so from the shore. And it's really a fun option until the trout fishing kicks back in the fall. So right now we're just going to go over a couple of the different rods that we use. One rod that I use is a 5-weight rod. This is a Gray's GRXI 5-weight with a Nautilus FWX 5/6 reel. It has a 5-weight floating line on it, and I also add a sink tip to it to get my streamers down where I want to fish under the water. I want to fish at a depth of anywhere from 5 to 10 feet. I can use this type of setup to get it down. The next setup I like to use is a little bit bigger. It's a 9-foot 9-weight rod. It's Temple Fork Outfitters Lefty Kretsch series with a conic 9-weight reel, Rio Outbound short, which is an actual saltwater line, but it's a weight forward heavy line that helps cast these big poppers that we throw in the weed beds and in the lily pads. So we're going to also talk about some of the flies that we're going to use and some of the tippet. Okay, we're going to talk about some of the tippets that we're going to use. You can use a standard bass leader that tapers down to 10 pounds, but sometimes you want to put extra tippet on there. You make it a little bit longer, shorter, or if that leader gets cut back. We're going to look at some of our fluorocarbon leader. I like using the Suffix 15-pound fluorocarbon. It's basically invisible in the water. It's a little bit stronger. I also use some of the Rio Fluoroflex plus tippet, anywhere from 5 pounds all the way to 12 pounds if it's thick cover or the fish are a little bit bigger. And we could even go with a monofilament, a little stiffer leader when we're throwing some of our poppers, because the monofilament will float. So when you're using flies that you want on top of the water, you want to use the monofilament as opposed to the fluorocarbon, which will sink. That's why we use the fluorocarbon with the streamers and the mono with the poppers. We'll take a look at some of the flies that we have here. We have some muddy buddies that we're going to use, some woolly buggers, some trout streamers, gray ghosts, Mickey fins, some muddler minnows in here. For some of the panfish, we have all different types of deer hair poppers. We have tiny little panfish poppers. These are called dragons that my friend Stanley Taylor from Fat Cat Flies custom makes for us. These are great for smaller bass and for panfish. We'll also throw some of these deer hair flies that he makes as well. We'll throw these in the weed beds. These imitate anything from a frog to a small trout or a small bass. We have some smaller deer hair poppers and some synthetics. Here's a smaller deer hair popper, which we'll use more so tonight. The fish on these beds are a little bit smaller, so they want a little bit smaller of a fly. And here's a synthetic balsa popper that we use for smallmouth, but it will work throwing it right in the weeds and on the lily pads. We can also use some bigger streamers to get down on that sink tip. This is another fly that he's developed. It's a double fly. We have a hook inside and then a trail or stinger hook on the end. This is made from all marabou feathers with some synthetic material here. You can cast these and troll them as well on the kayaks.
So one of the questions I get is, what sort of equipment do I need if I want to start fishing from either a canoe or a kayak? So I think that really there's not a whole lot of additional equipment. Like anyone else, you're going to need a paddle. I have this one because it actually fits lower in the water and is easy to set down while I'm catching fish. You're going to need to either go to an online retailer or to your local retailer and get a rod holder. While you're paddling, you obviously won't be using your rod. You're going to want some place to put it, and also when you rig up as well. You're also going to want a fly box, and unlike some of the ones that fit on your chest or in a vest, you really want something with a low profile, because I'm actually going to fit this box underneath my legs and out of the way while I'm fishing. And then obviously in accordance with the laws in most states, you're going to want a personal flotation device or some other life-saving device, either in the kayak or on your person. One of the other things that I would recommend for kayak fly fishing, although I don't have it with me here today, is I put these skegs on here specifically to put in an anchor. A lot of times you'll be on a river or lake, you'll find a great spot, and either the wind or the current will be moving you along, and it's great to have something like this with a small anchor, maybe no more than 20-30 feet of line on it. It will definitely help you out in situations like that.
Okay, we're here getting ready to launch for our bass outing. I just want to go over, I have a Hobie sport kayak. What's unique about the Hobies and makes them so great for fishing is this Mirage drive system. This is a pedal system where it propels you through the water, so you don't have to worry about paddling all the time. And it makes life a lot easier. It gives you hand-free fishing. You can steer using the rudder system. We also have a Garmin Echo 150 fish finder on it. Mostly looking for bottom, for structure on the bottom, maybe schools of bait. It's really handy to use just so you can get the lay of the land underneath. We have custom Hobie seat that gives you some back support with a pillow that will release some of the pressure off your back. My personal flotation device, I got the Capella, is inflatable, that you just pull the cord if you go in the water and it inflates. I store my tippet right on my seat, my pliers and my cutters right on my seat, so everything is out of the way. I have some rod holder mounts up front. I also have a milk crate where I store my flies, any flies that I've been using. Have a light for safety that you should always have on if there are other boats in the water. Rod system where everything is latched in, so if they do fall over you can retrieve them, and they're easy to grab when you're fishing. We have a rudder system in the back that is controlled in the front that makes you is able to stay on course, which makes life a lot easier when the wind is blowing as it is tonight. So hopefully we'll be able to get into some fish and you can see the Hobies in action.
Hi, and welcome back to On the Fly. As you can tell, we had an absolutely great day on the water. We fought a little wind, but we caught a lot of fish as well. I'm here again with my guest, Frank DeGrazio, licensed New York State guide. How you doing? Before we get into the fishing, I actually want to spend a couple of minutes talking about Lake Kenoshia. I was surprised that so many people actually didn't know about the lake, and I actually had to find out a little bit more about it myself. It's not a natural lake. It's actually a 60-acre lake that is a dammed section of the Still River, which I didn't know before the other day. It has 2 launches in it for those of you that want to launch your kayak and canoe, and it can only be kayak and canoe because they don't allow any motorized vehicle on the lake. One of the launches is right there centrally located in the park, and you'll find it quite easily. It's by the picnic area. The other one is at the far end on the east side of the lake. A little bit harder to find, but a great area to launch from if you have the chance. Much less traffic around it, and certainly ample parking. So let's switch to what we came to talk about today, which is fly fishing. And for this lake, although it says it's largemouth, sunfish, yellow perch, and crappie, we're really going to focus on 3 types of fish that we found in there, at least ones that we caught that day. And the first was largemouth bass. And I think we've got a picture of a bass to show you for those of you who aren't familiar with what one looks like. And that's a great looking bass. Frank actually provided that photo to us. I love catching bass. They're a good fighting fish. They're fairly easy to find. In my experience, they'll take almost any type of fly or popper that you have. Frank, what's been your experience? Because I know you regularly go out, searching and fishing for bass. What are your thoughts?
We started early in the year, right after ice out, when that water starts to warm up. We start trying to target them in those shallow areas. They start moving in to get ready to spawn once the late springtime comes. But we basically focus using smaller flies earlier on in the springtime. We want to get those flies down as they're still in a little bit of deeper water. And as they move into the shallow areas, then those flies can get a little bit bigger. Okay.
And then the second type of fish that we found that I think is probably one of the most fun fish to fly fish for is sunfish. And, I love the pumpkin seeds, the brim, the bluegill, and I think we have a picture of one of those as well for you to see. Hopefully bigger than some of the ones I picked up at the lake. Yeah, that's a great picture of one that Frank provided to us. Whenever I take someone fly fishing for the first time, I usually don't take them out on a river because of the currents and the wading. I usually try and find a lake like this or a farm pond, something very similar, because sunfish have to be one of the easiest fish to catch. They're very eager and they're a lot of fun, and especially if you're teaching someone, it's a great fish because you can catch a lot of them in the short time. I know you probably don't target sunfish in that regularly, but what are your thoughts as far as how to fish for them and that type of thing?
Well, like you said, they're a great fish to start out with, but we do target them. We use really light setups, so it's a lot more fun fishing for them, using a little bit bigger flies to try to catch some bigger sunfish. But once they start inhabiting and coming into those shallow areas, they really start turning on and feeding in the late spring.
That's fantastic. And the last type of fish, unfortunately we don't have a picture for it, but a very popular fish up here is the black crappie. Unfortunately that day I did not run into any of them, but from what I understand, Frank had spent some additional time there and he found a place basically full of them and did quite well.
Yeah, they school up on some of the drop-off areas. I was using a white small woolly bugger to target them about 10-15 feet down. I was using the fish finder to try to locate those schools. And once you get into one, you can get into quite a few. And they're a lot of fun on the fly. A lot of people use spin tackle for them, and they're also a good table fare as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I want to pick up on something you said when we were talking about bass, because especially in the Northeast, this is a major consideration. And are there better times of year to fish, especially specifically for warm water species up here? I tend to go pretty much year round, but I know you probably have some additional insight on that, when the best time is to go.
Late spring is good when they're getting ready to spawn. The bass are really aggressive. They're in the shallow areas protecting their reds, so they'll hit almost anything that they throw. And you get those bigger fish that push in from the depths. And also in the fall. In the fall, they're looking in those shallow areas, looking to stock up and eat smaller bait fish to fatten up for the long winter ahead.
Okay, great. And then I know that the time of day too varies. We were out, oh gosh, what, in the afternoon
Evening
for that
time.
shot, afternoon to dusk, and had a great time, and certainly, plenty of fish there, but I know that's not always true, and I know it changes with the season. So can you give us some insight on how we might switch up, how we fish that lake that day depending on the time of year?
Early in the springtime, you want to focus on the middle part of the day when that sun is high and that water's starting to warm up. As that water gets warm, you want to switch and go to your low light conditions early in the morning, late afternoon, evening time, and in the fall, basically any time is good as long as they're on the feed and they'll be moving around.
Okay, great. And then I know we talked about flies in the initial segment, but really, I'd like to spend a little more time now that we're back here in the studio and have you really walk us through the type of fly you would use, maybe based on a combination of the type of fish you're going for, the time of year it is, and basically how you adjust accordingly. And let's start with, if you don't mind, let's start with the bass.
Start with some bass fly. This is a nice
Okay.
little searching pattern I like using at any time during the year. And we can throw this in shallow areas, but it's nice and small where you're able to see and find, whether it's small bass, large bass in there. So it's got a tiny 1/0 hook on there with a little weed guard, so you can throw it through the heavy, thick cover, but it's a great searching pattern to use.
And you're saying that's primarily a bass fly?
Most likely a bass fly. That's a little too big for panfish, but you might get some crappie. If you're in a lake where there's pickerel, the pickerel will definitely attack that as well.
All right. And what's the name of that fly again? I'm sorry.
This is just a deer hair popper. This is all bucktail that is stacked and cut down with a little bit of marabou, some rubber legs, and it's just a foam deer hair popper.
Okay.
We use.
Great.
Okay. We also use another deer hair popper. A little bit bigger if we're targeting some bigger fish. This is a great fly to use once they're on the spawn, throwing them in those big, weed beds and wide open areas where they are. The bigger fish will definitely, hit this fly. The smaller ones will hit it, but you won't have any hookups. The hook is too big on it.
Right, they'll just sort of pick at it,
Pick
if you
at
will,
it.
and it looks like it'll be moving, but there's not anything large enough to catch on.
Yes.
Right?
I like early in the season for crappie and for some sunfish, just a little sculpin pattern that we use on that sink tip line that we showed you earlier on in the clip. And this has a nice weighted head, so it does help it get down to the bottom. And it swims right along the bottom. And you could also put a little trailer hook on here to help as well.
And is that marabou on there, Frank?
Yes, a little bit of
head?
marabou and a zonker strip, which is rabbit.
Okay, and that marabou, from what I understand, helps it, I guess it makes it, give it a more lifelike
Gives a
profile, if you will.
great action to that little tail section. We just have another little deer hair fly that I use for panfish. I fish this one right below the surface. It will float, but I would like it right below. I could also use this on a sinking line to get it down. This is another effective pattern with some deer hair and just some more marabou.
Okay.
Here. And one of my favorite patterns are the little dragons that my friend Stan from Fat Cat Flies ties up for me. These are great. These you can use mostly for sunfish, but you can target bass as well. I've had them come out of the weeds just to hit one of these. We have some foam that helps it float with some rubber legs. He's got some UV dubbing on here that he dubs on there to give it a nice little sparkle and profile. A small size 8 extra long hook, so it's tiny and you can target a lot of different species. This is almost my searching and go-to pattern when I first get out there.
Right. Now we're going to talk about weeds and grass and the types of things that you find in a lake like that a little bit later, but I didn't notice, do you have any of your flies that are weedless?
Yes, this one has a weed guard on it.
And can you explain to them what a weed guard does?
Yeah, the weed guard just protects the hook. This one was tied right behind the eye of the hook, and it's tied behind all the deer hair, and it just protects that hook point, so you can rip this through lily pads, you can take it through weeds, and it will help prevent from getting hung up and and there. It does move side to side, so when the fish does hit it, the hook is exposed and you can have a nice hookup.
Right. And that doesn't prevent you from catching fish? You don't miss any fish because of it?
No.
Okay. All right, great. So as I'm looking across the box here, clearly there's the full spectrum of colors, and wanted to ask you, either based on season or type of fish, or way that you're approaching them, does color matter? And if so, can you give us some insight on what colors might be the best?
I like using darker colors earlier in the season. Olives, blacks, they look like those tiny little bait fish with sometimes with a light profile underneath if it's a little alewife or a tiny sunfish. And as the summer goes on, we get a little bit brighter fly. Into the fall, we use yellows, browns, oranges, and that really turns the fish on pretty well. But we try to keep things slim. I know it looks like that they're big and bulky, but once they get wet, it's a slim profile that will be able to move through the water, and that's basically what you want. You want that fly to be able to be seen. If it's murky, dark water, we use a little bit of a darker fly. If it's a bright, sunny condition, like on the day that we went and the day that I went, I like using some brighter flies. The water in that lake is pretty clear, so it kind of helps to use your whites with a little bit of pink, bright orange, and yellow.
Great, great. Question for you. I mentioned earlier, a lot of times, or not a lot of times, sometimes when I'm out fishing and I'll be using something top water, I'll find something that starts to pick at the fly or the popper, and it looks like it's going to take it. I think I've got a strike, and of course I pull it away and there's nothing there. I think typically it's probably smaller fish, but do you have any recommendations as far as what you do in that type of situation?
I slim down. I'll use one of the dragons when I first get out there just to see what's going on. I'll use the smaller popper that I have here. And like you said, you want those smaller flies, one, to get some hookups with fish to really see what is out there. If you know that you're in an area, especially during spawning time, and you're targeting big fish, then you can throw your bigger flies. But once you get out there, if you want to search around, you throw smaller streamers, smaller poppers, anything that's going to, cause you to hook up and land a fish to see what's really going on out there.
Great, great. Most of what you've shown me is what we would probably say is top water, with the exception of the sculpin over there probably. Can you talk a little bit about when it makes sense any time of year to go from top water to subsurface? When do you make that decision, and are there seasons where you may say, I predominantly fish subsurface?
I like going out and using the fish finder, seeing where those fish are if I'm in some deeper water. I also look just along the shore to see what the bait fish are doing. If the bait fish are concentrated on top, and you can see you get a grass line or weed beds, and you see those fish sitting on top, you can look for those bass that are coming up and ambushing them from the bottom. If you're not hearing gulps and slurps, then I would go down and search, use maybe a weighted streamer to help get you down. But it's really based on each different time or the water you're fishing. Late spring, shallow water, bass are on the spawn, they're in that shallow water. But that's really the only exception. All the other times of the year, it's basically what you find once you get out there. I mean, there are times too where I go out and just say, I'm going to throw poppers today. I want to catch one on the top water. I want to see that explosion. But other times too, you're trolling and you're searching, so you need that fly that's going to sink down 10, 15 feet.
Right. And does it pretty much hold true as it does with other types of fishing, that sometimes the cloudy, maybe even slightly rainy days are just as good for topwater than maybe some of the bright sunny days like when you and I have gone out?
Yeah, I think so. I think the fish definitely feel more comfortable in the cloudy weather, so those bait fish will come up to the surface. They'll feel a little bit more secure, but it makes them also easy prey as well. Okay,
great, great. I want to switch gears for a second here. Well, that was a sizable lake that we were in there. There's certainly a lot of things both on the top of the water and underneath as well. And so I want to spend a few minutes. I'm going to talk about primarily I'll call it the 4 types of areas you're going to encounter on a lake like that. The first will be grass, the second will be open water, the third will be lily pads, and then lastly, Frank and I will talk about drop-off. So I think we actually have a slide with some grass in it, if someone can pull that up for us. Right. that's a great shot of some seagrass like that, and it's very thick. It holds a lot of fish, but I can tell you I spent a good portion of that day, basically cleaning my line off after every cast. I either came back with a fish on it, or I was cleaning a lot of the seagrass off of it, and it holds a lot of life and actually acts as part of the nursery for them. Do you have any thoughts for us about when you're approaching a grassy area like that of how to do it? I know sometimes I'll start at the very edge and work my way in, hoping that I don't get caught up in it. But do you have any other thoughts about when you encounter something like that, how you should be fishing it?
Well, I'll find it, and then just like you were, your kayak was in great position, as you want to really start slowing that boat up once you get about 15 to 25 yards away from it, because as you're cruising, you'll see the fish that are above, all the small sunnies and bayfish are above that grass line. And the larger fish, pickerel and bass, they'll come up and ambush those fish from below. And what you want to do is be able to sneak up on them and be able to throw your flies in right where they are.
Right. Now let me ask you, what about if I just waded into the grass bed? Because in that particular slide, there was probably, I'll say the grass bed was 20 feet wide, 30 feet wide, easily a few hundred yards long. Does it make a difference? Should I be staying in the open water casting into the grass, or does it matter if I just sort of, paddle up into the grass and try and, fish certain spots?
I would look for those little small openings. In that one section that we can see on the TV, there's a couple, there's a grass line in front, and then we see their little open area. Those fish will sit right in those open areas. So if you can get that fly into that spot, you'll probably get a strike. That day we were out, I was throwing into some open areas and had some strikes from smaller fish, but early on in the season, those bigger fish will be in there waiting to ambush prey. So I'm just looking for those tiny little open areas, that thick grass where it's all covered. They'll be underneath that area, looking into those open areas as well.
And will you change up the size of fly, the type of fly, based upon the fact that you're targeting something that's the size of a small pool or a bathtub?
I'll shrink the fly down, but I really want something that floats, because like you said, if you get down into that grass area, you can be stripping through, and a fish will take you right into there and tangle you up and pop you off, just like we had that night. But I want something that's really going to sit high, sit right on top, that's going to make a little bit of a commotion.
Yeah, I didn't mention this before, but before we go any further, do you change up your leader at all depending on the type of grass or lily pads, that type of thing, or do you
Not really with the type of structure, but with the type of fly.
Okay.
If I'm going to throw something that's sitting on top, the monofilament will work because it floats. If I'm going to target down below and I want something a little bit more invisible, I'll go with the fluorocarbon. Or if I want to use fluorocarbon, which is virtually invisible in the water, I'm going to have to really go down a couple of sizes, throwing those big poppers, because they'll be able to keep it afloat. But you run the risk of breaking off in that thick cover.
Absolutely. So the next slide I'd like to pull up is the one with open water in it, and I believe we actually have a picture of Frank in his kayak on some open water out there. That would be, that's probably me in the lily pads. And we can stick with that one, and then we'll go to the open water next. Lily pads, obviously the next type of cover, and clearly wherever you find the grass, you find the lily pads. I frequently get caught up in them, regardless of my casting, but yet, as you and I both know, they hold a lot of bass, hold a lot of other types of fish as well. Any thoughts about how you approach them?
I like searching out those lily pads and finding the clumps that are together and finding an open space in those clumps. The frogs will sit on those lily pads, they'll fall into the water, and they'll sit right in those open areas, and they're just resting, and they make great prey for those bass and pickerel that live underneath. The sunfish will try to take cover in that thick lily pad, because like you said, you get caught in there. They know that they can hide and get away very easily. So again, you want to target those edges, or if you can get in to the lily pads and really push the boat in there, and then you have the whole spectrum. You can bounce your poppers and your deer hair flies, and I'll bounce them from lily pad to lily pad, and just as it falls into the water, it'll trigger a strike. So
because they're waiting for it, right?
Yeah, so I'll either target the outside, or I'm going to push really deep in there. It's a little difficult with the Mirage drive with the pedals. The lily pads get caught in, but that's what the paddle is for.
Right. So can we pull up the slide of the open water with Frank in it? That's the one. Okay. So you're in that particular slide, you're farther out, and you can see the grass and the lily pads to this side, but you're further out. This is probably the most common type of fishing that people think of when they think about going to a lake like this. And to be honest, I usually find more luck around the grass and the lily pads, not as much out in the open water, but I'm guessing probably you also fish it a bit differently, and I'd like to hear a little more about that.
Well, right in that section there, using the fish finder, everybody wants to know, oh, are you looking for fish? Now, I'm looking for on the bottom. I'm looking for structure. I'm looking for rocks or anything that's submerged or drop-offs. Where the kayak was at that point was a drop-off that went from anywhere from 5 feet down to 12 feet. So there was a nice gradient slant where the fish were sitting right along that edge. So it's not so much you're fishing that open, dead water space where it's just plain flat bottom.
Right.
I'm looking for those edges with the fish finder to try to find where those fish are going to be. I'll use a sink tip line, smaller flies, so I can get them down, and I'll either troll them or to cover some ground and find where the fish are, or I'll just cast and let them sink and slow strip retrieve back.
Okay, okay. And you know, lakes around here range from the traditional sandy bottom to ones that are very rocky and even difficult as you wade out into them. Any way that you treat that differently, either when you're prospecting for where the fish might be or when you're choosing the type of fly or how deep to go?
I look at the bottom. I try to find rocks. Sometimes you will have some grass beds that will come off that never make it to the surface. You're looking for any structure where there's going to hold bait fish, more so than larger fish that you're targeting. You want to find structure and bait. So if you're in open water and you're really using that fish finder and doing what it's supposed to do, is looking for all that structure, you can stop, see the bait, drop a line down with that sink tip line and get it down there and hopefully have some success.
Okay, okay. So the other day when you know, I had never been to Lake Kenoshia, and I think you had been there, maybe once before me, so neither of us would be experts on the lake by any stretch. When I chose a place to start, I went to what I know, which is basically the grassy beds. And the question I've got for you is, so we had open water, we had drop-offs, we had lily pads, grass. When you come to relatively new water, unfamiliar water, do you have a strategy that you employ as far as where you start to prospect and look for fish, or are you like me, you're looking for grass or lily pads, or do you basically start at one end and work your way around to the other? What attracts you to certain areas, and what's your strategy?
Well, if I have an underwater map and I can see those drop-offs, I'll take a look at that first and see if I can locate some GPS coordinates, different drop-offs, areas I want to find.
Okay.
So that's some homework before that. With Lake Kenosha, I didn't have that opportunity, but when I first went out, I went directly to the deepest point that I could find, and I worked my way in. I wanted to know where the deep part was. I wanted to know where it started to come up, and then I could work in towards all the lily pads and the grass lines and that sort of thing. So I really use the fish finder to my advantage in that point. So I'll start deep and work shallow. Or just a lot of times go with what you're familiar with. You like fishing those grass lines. I love throwing stuff right on top of those lily pads. So sometimes I might just start there just based on a hunch at time of the year. But with new water like that, I like trying to work deep.
Right. And if you don't have a depth finder, a fish finder on there, how would your approach change? I mean, because you're probably looking at the water and you're wondering, is this 5 feet or 50 feet deep? And what are, how do you test it, I guess?
Well, a way you can just put a drop sinker on your fly line. I know based on the fly line how much of the head is colored on the line, how much is out, and really see exactly how deep you are. That's one way to do it. It's not an easy way, it's not the ideal way, but if you don't have a fish finder, that's a good way to do it. And as you work in, you can find where the water comes up.
All right. Now we talked about the lily pads and grass and the cover like that. What about shade? Because that's another area that I typically look for, and I know we had some of that on one side of the lake and not very much of it on the other side. How does that play into what you're looking to do?
The day that I fished it was a really bright day, high sky, no clouds. So I fished mostly the opposite side of the lake, and I targeted all the shady areas. There's a lot of private homes over there, so there's docks. There are a lot of overhanging trees. So every time I started at one end and worked every shady area until I found fish. So that's a great tactic to use in the middle of the day if you're under a time constraint and that's the only time that you have to fish, as in that one day with me. But you like using that shade. The water can be anywhere from 5 to 8 degrees cooler, which will trigger a lot of strikes. It's tough to get those flies underneath those overhanging trees, but if you can get them in there, sidearm cast will help you. You'll definitely be successful.
Right. And what about terrestrials? Because that's one of the things when I think about bugs falling out of trees, and I know we didn't specifically discuss it as much here, but ants, beetles, that type, they're all,
Sure, you can use them in bigger patterns. I wouldn't use them the same size as we use them for trout. For trout, we use them anywhere from 14s down to size 20 with ants and beetles. You can use some hopper patterns that will work, some stimulators that you would use for trout out west to really try to get those fish to bite. You'll get a lot of panfish that way. A lot of the bass want some bigger stuff, frogs, crayfish patterns, and that sort of thing. Bait fish, imitations. They're not going to waste their time on a small beetle, but you can hammer panfish all day, and that would be great.
Okay, great. Docks. That was the other thing we didn't do, and there are in that particular lake. There's a fair amount of docks. Had a mixed results with docks. A lot of people really like to come at them from the outside fishing towards the shore, and they feel the same way about boats in the water as well. Do you usually head for those types of areas as well, or is it sort of dependent on what the weather's doing? Or
I'll take a look at the dock. I'll come in from the side and throw in towards the shore first, and then work my way from the side back out in front of the dock to the opposite side, almost like you're going, around the clock.
Sort of a U shape, if you will.
Hitting different parts and change up the flies as well. So I'll have 2 fly rods rigged. Throwing into the shallow area, I might use a popper or something that's subsurface, right underneath that surface.
Right.
Once I get in front, a lot of times the docks are a little bit deeper, they're dredged out in front. So what I'll do is throw a streamer pattern, something heavier to get down. When I got into the school of block crappie, it was right in front of a dock about 5 feet off.
Was it really? And did you catch a bunch in that one, or did you have to sort of move sequentially down the shoreline?
They were schooled up in that area, and had quite a few hookups landed, quite a few on the boat that day. And once the school, moved off, then I had to move as well. But that school stayed around that dock and that structure for quite a while.
Oh, that's great. Well, I think we have a few minutes left, and I'd like to get to the piece of this that I think people don't spend enough time on. They don't really think that much about, and you see a lot of different things on television. So I'd like to talk a little bit about retrieving and stripping and style and speed. And I believe we have a short clip on that as well. And maybe you can walk us through what you're.
Okay, that's just a short strip retrieve. I'm working a popper right there, pulling it down pretty hard, trying to cause a lot of commotion on the surface, not really pausing it too much, but you will get those strikes on that pause. It's a great technique to use, especially in those lily pads and those weed beds where you can make a lot of noise with the fly.
Now, I notice you're going a little. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Here it looks. We have the streamer on, and the streamer has some weight in the front. So just by pulling those long little strips, I'm making it dance up and down subsurface in the water. And what you're trying to imitate is an injured bait fish. So it is kind of moving and squirming around. With those poppers, you're imitating just a frog that's coming across, maybe a big bug like you said. And a lot of times you'll get those strikes on that pause. So it'll be a hard strip, pop, and then that pause, and that's when those fish come up. When you're working those streamers and you're zigzagging the clousers or a beadhead streamer, it's zigzagging, and you'll get a hit at any point in that.
Right.
But what you want to try to do is, a lot of people, you want to strip set that. And what that means is that when that fish pulls, you're pulling that line and you're stripping it back. A lot of people, especially in the salt, and it's the same technique, they want to lift the rod like your trout setting. But with bass and saltwater, everything is that strip hard set. You got to get that big hook in their mouth.
Right. Now I noticed in the clip there, while you had long strips, you weren't really doing it very quickly, and I didn't. Is that because you don't have to do it that way for them, or is it that because more of the fast stripping is really reserved for rivers and currents and trout, or what? I guess what dictates that?
The season. They're a little bit slower right now in that warm water. They're trying to get as much food as possible using as little energy, so they're not going to take to that fast herky-jerky motion where it's that quick like we would with trout. So it basically depends on the season. Early when they're aggressive, that quick strip will be great, and they'll be really aggressive. Now they're kind of a little bit lethargic. That water is in the high 70s, so it's more of a slow motion type retrieve.
Right. I know sometimes I'll take and cast and actually wait until I guess the wake from the fly hitting the water is out 6 or 7 feet to move it before I do anything with it. Is that primarily just doing that with poppers, or would you also do that with some of the larger flies as well?
With the larger flies that sink, you want to let them get down. So usually I'll know, how fast that sink tip goes, whether it's 3, 4, 5 inches per second, and count it down. With those poppers, if you have some active fish, you can start that retrieve right away, and
That's
will help.
great. That's great. Well, it was a great day on the lake, and if you get a chance, I hope you'll go out and fish it as well. It looks like we have just about run out of time here, so first of all, I want to thank my guest again, Frank DeGrazio from the Anglers Den, coming out to spend some time with us. I'd like to thank the crew for working with us on this, and Channel 8, Public Access, and thank you for watching.